here, but not.
Welcome, everybody. We have members of our Planning Commission and our full City Commission here, welcoming for kind of a first step in a long, it's taken us several months, if not years, to get here. So we're really excited about this next step of kicking off our growth plan discussions. And glad to see a few members in the audience as well from the public. Really, we did this exercise with our core neighborhood plan, and it seemed to work really well. So we're going to try it again with our growth plan. And in essence, before we go live with the RFP, we want to just make sure we've got, as staff, a good understanding of Planning Commission and City Commission's needs and expectations of the upcoming growth plan and any questions that you might have. And we'll be, our goal is to bring a draft RFP to the City Commission on September 19th to go live for public proposals. And I think it's about a 30-day timeline on, so the whole goal we're trying to get to is securing a contract and a consultant under tract by the end of the year. And so that is our goal. And I wanted to introduce Mark. You guys know Mark as our assistant director, and then Kim Satrowski, who is our new long-range planner. And she's been with us now for about 4 months, I think. And but was with us previous to that. I think, how long have you worked with the city, Kim? Total, yeah. Probably a good 12 years or so. Yeah, we'll go with 12. And so anyway, I'm going to kick it off to Mark and Kim to lead us on to this next step. It's supposed to be informal and really just a way to kind of have informal dialogue, but there's a short facilitated process Kim and Mark want to take you through.
You know, I know many of the planning people know the commissioners, but could we go around and introduce
sure,
the planning
absolutely.
commission?
Thank you.
Because there's some new faces I see. But
Yeah, thank you.
I see some old faces, but some new faces too. Tim Mahoney, Mayor.
I'm Rocky Schneider, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Art Rosenberg, Planning Commission.
John Gunkelman, Planning Commission.
John Strand, City Commission.
Jennifer Holtz, Planning Commission.
Denise Kolpak, City Commission.
Dave Pepcorn, City Commission.
Kim Satrowski, Planning Department.
Mark Williams, Planning Department.
Arlette Preston, City Commission.
Tommy Schmidt, Planning Commission.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yep.
Housekeeping. So I'll turn it over to Mark and Kim.
Thanks for everybody showing up today. The growth plan is something that we've been working with a long time, and right now we currently are using 4 different growth plans as we try guiding the growth in the city of Fargo. And it's pretty evident based on new trends in the development world that there are some identified land uses that are lacking. And as a result, with the core neighborhood plan and the land development code diagnostic, both studies pointed to the fact that we really needed a new growth plan, which is kind of why we're putting this at the top of the list as far as priorities. As we've gone through the process staff-wise and kind of started preparing for the RFP process, we have contemplated, what a growth plan is for and what we need a growth plan for and how we've used it in the past. And it's been an amazing document for us to be able to work with developers and work with people interested in putting together projects and guiding what is the wishes of the city of Fargo as identified through the city commission. And as we start this, we're going to have a little facilitated discussion. And I see some people are already jumping ahead a little bit, but you have a piece of paper in front of you, and with that piece of paper, there's going to be 2 questions. What is the purpose of the growth plan to you? And then what do you want the growth plan to achieve? And if we could spend just a couple minutes maybe writing those answers down, we're going to go around and talk to people.
Before you do that, would you explain even to us, the commissioners, how the growth plan ties back into the land? Could you just quickly, so that will help us, I think, in figure out what the purpose is and how the growth plan ties back to the land development code,
Sure.
Just to clarify something, are we jumping to put out an RFP for a growth plan first before the land development one?
Correct.
Okay, so,
And let's start back to what the growth plan is. State law gives us the ability to have extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is a certain amount of miles beyond our city limits. And it gives us the ability to control the zoning in that area and to help plan for good future growth. And as you've seen on some of our older arterials, it's really challenging to develop around like rural subdivisions. And that ET ability gives us the ability to be able to try properly planning through that. And what the growth plan does is the growth plan kind of analyzes what land consumption we've had in the past, kind of forecasts what we're going to see in the future, and helps divide up, the identified land uses. So as a developer buys a half section of land and they start conceptualizing how they want this to roll out, we have a really good idea what we want to see that for land uses based on past history. For instance, it helps us really guide our arterials because those get to be highly traveled roads, and some uses aren't really compatible with a highly traveled road. As well as it identifies pedestrian corridors, bike routes, park facilities, school facilities. And it's a great document for the planning department to be able to use when we're working with a developer to really guide them in the right direction of what we really need. And the second comment, as far as starting the growth plan prior to the land development code, so our existing growth plan was put together in 2007. And there are uses that are not identified in that growth plan that have become pretty popular today. For instance, mixed-use type developments. And I think that's one of the reasons why our land development code is outdated, because we don't have a zoning district that allows that technically by right other than UMU and DMU. So really, I think the idea would be, and then there's this, urban center concept that's kind of coming down the pike as far as creating, a live-work areas that's becoming popular in the development world. And we don't really have a zoning district that covers that either as far as encouraging that type of density. So in order for us to be able to try conceptualizing what those zoning districts might be, we really need to go and look at what our future growth is going to be and identify those so we can build a zoning district around those new proposed land uses in the future.
so essentially that would help when we do the LDC.
Yeah, maybe real quick. And so there's a little presentation after this. And so really what we want to do is get your answers unfiltered by staff so that we're open, we're kind of hearing unbiased comments. We don't want to influence you yet. And so, but basically you can think of the comprehensive plan, Go 2030, our growth plan, which is our future land use plan, and then that future land use plan and the growth plan, the future land use plan, which is the growth plan, and the comprehensive plan direct our land development code. And so we don't want to start, we want to kind of affirm that big picture before we work on the details of the ordinance. Because if we don't understand what our values are, the ordinance writing is going to be really painful. And so we want to get that values double checked, as well as our intentions of growth, and make sure we have it analyzed through data, et cetera. So, so that's a little bit of why we're trying to update our tools from big picture to small picture.
And from a policy or an outlook for years, with this growth plan being it's been so long, is there maybe a plan to, in a perfect world, how often would you update the growth plan? Or so how far out are you wanting
I
to go with the growth plan?
I think I don't know if I want to answer that question yet. I know where you're going, but.
Well, no, I was just getting, because it's been a long time and we've talked about that, and then you had to go 2030 comprehensive plan in between that. that we refer back to quite often in decision-making. I was just curious, I mean, are we supposed to be looking 10 years down the road? Are we supposed to be, what?
So I think our goal for long-range planning is probably a 50-year vision, right? So we want to be thinking all the way out in the future.
John and I won't be here.
Right, but nor will I. And so, but I think our growth plan that was currently adopted was in '07. Typically, we would maybe try to update those every 10 to 15 years.
5 to 10 years, I think would be a good practice to just, I think we're going to have a document that really tells us what we want to see, but in order to keep it healthy, it's good to touch base every 5 to 10 years on that document to make sure that there hasn't been any changes. So being said, if you could spend a couple minutes of maybe writing down some answers to those two questions on the pieces of paper that we handed out to you, and we're going to try collecting some information. I'll give you a couple minutes.
When was the last time we did this?
Well, we technically, the major rewrite would have been 2007, but
2007. And if you look back from now to 2007, have we in planning and commission been following the plan?
I would say for the most part,
The most
yes.
part.
And if we've found some discrepancies, we've done a pretty good job at doing growth plan amendments through the planning commission process, working with the developer.
And then we just had a discussion on one of the apartments going up north side in which they talked about a height requirement. Are you asking for that in a growth plan, that if we do something in the neighborhoods, are going to look at height requirements or aesthetics, or is it a front porch? Is that what you're doing in your growth plan, or are we talking global?
I think the growth plan is going to identify maybe in some of those areas what that use should be, and then the zoning district's going to reflect what the height limit of that zoning district should be.
And then John Strand in sustainability, we talked about lighting and lighting in communities. And we got some complaints in our growth plan. What happened is the sweet shots got set in South Fargo, and neighborhood didn't like the lighting. Are you guys eventually get into lighting, questions about lighting? You know, Walmart has a certain amount of lights or whatever around it. So when we do commercial in that area, do we restrict that in any way? Or, John, you brought that up in sustainability of the lights and stuff.
That's going to be when we work on the land development code, talking about the individual zoning districts and how the city wants to see those.
And I'm assuming you want us to be more global in this discussion here today, but just curious about little nuances that you may have noticed that then would go in the land development code, I would presume, but.
All of it starts with the growth plan, and each different document gets more and more detail.
How do you want us to let you know what we wrote down?
Yeah, once I see everyone's kind of heads pop up, I think what we'll do is we'll start maybe with Commissioner Preston, and there's no wrong or right answer. And I have a feeling that there's probably going to be a lot of similar answers, which is okay. Megan in the back is going to be taking the notes so we can actually break this down and consolidate them a little bit more after this meeting and sort of compare that with what we're thinking with the RFP and make sure we're on the right track and make sure that we're completely bringing everyone's vision in on this document.
Well, when the last plan was released was about the same time the first iPhone was released. And so the fact that the Planning Commission has been following the growth plan through 14 iPhone releases seems like must have been a pretty good plan.
Thanks for history, Rocky.
And a couple floods since then.
Yeah, and then 2 years after 2007 was the beginning of things that the 2007 growth plan never even anticipated, including the diversion,
Yeah.
which changes a lot of things.
I think you're up, you gotta kick us off.
He said Commissioner Preston was kicking us off, so.
She's a slow writer.
Commissioner Preston, do you want to kick us off?
With it?
I think you may be ready to kick us off on the first answer for what's the purpose of the growth plan to you?
The purpose one? And well, I only identified 3 of them, but I'll take my second one. Identify key characteristics for various types of land uses and how that feeds into the LDC. I'm thinking specifically neighborhoods.
Are we just reading one? That's kind of what we're doing.
Yep.
One that I put would be to encourage or mandate high-quality, smart development that creates wealth for the city and property owners.
Mayor?
Oh, you want our number one, is that it? Yeah. Mine was blueprint for the growth of Fargo, basically.
I was going to say it's an opportunity for staff to step back from their work and kind of compile the data that the city collects through lots of plans to kind of get a anticipated look at what changes are going to come in our future and give the citizens and businesses a blueprint for what we expect the future to look like.
We just repeat everything? No, again. It's just a roadmap for the future.
Mine was shape the future growth to the, shape the future growth to the south, limited by the diversion. And although, once the diversion gets done, we'll be due for a new growth plan.
Mine is similar to Art, establish a roadmap designed to manage and direct growth in a timely fashion.
Identify and clarify needs, expectations for future growth, so that we can create a document that serves as a guide for city planning, other departments, and the citizens.
Mine is to provide clear goals of what we want to achieve with the new area land with succinct priorities and principles.
Mine is to help future leaders know, obviously, we're not going to be in our positions forever, so to know what our vision was, and then hopefully they would see what we were thinking and maybe not think the same way, but at least know the direction we were headed.
Do you have a second one or a third one? Yeah. Sure.
So it's similar to what's said before, but provide a vision or a roadmap for future growth in undeveloped land.
Are we doing the achieve one now, or just?
No, if you run out of the first question, that's all right. We can just keep going around until we're all out.
Sure, I don't really have much to add other than what's
Okay.
already been.
And if you find yourself repeating, we have it written down, so.
Smart growth with the balance of our new development in our older neighborhoods. So it's the same struggles we're getting into all the time as you and the planning commission have plans come before you. Just saw a new plan and the neighbor got involved, and that's where they raised the height question, how it looked, all those crazy things that you start to get into. So to me, what would be smart growth? How would we want that to have happen? I think Nicole, on one of our new developments, it looked like, it did density, but it didn't do it theoretically to the neighborhood in the right way. And I remember the governor always just said, just put density in the older neighborhoods. And that looked like, oh, okay, no, easy peasy. But when you got into the neighborhoods, oh no, they didn't want that, or oh no, they didn't want this, or oh no, they didn't want that. So it appeared to me that there has to be some kind of smart growth that we kind of agree on that you can do and try to incentivize. I think as a commission, we've tried to figure out how do you incentivize what we would say would be really good growth in the neighborhoods. But I've always been surprised in this position, and I'm sure Planning Commission as well, that certain things come to you and they just don't fit with the neighborhood. They don't want it, or they don't like what we're thinking of. And those are the ones in which fills the room. We have all the neighbors here and we have things going on. The easy thing about new development is we have very little to say about that other than you look at the plat, but you don't. I know on the south side now we have areas where we probably should have put commercial, because if people want to get out and get milk or loaf of bread, they drive 2 miles. And is that really smart growth with energy issues there are now? So I will kind of hone in on what is smart growth in the new world, so.
Sure.
I was just going to add maybe an internal purpose is the planning department gets to talk to the other departments and show them what they anticipate for growth, so that you can plan for infrastructure and utilities and budget them accordingly as well. So there's sort of an internal purpose.
I think just, again, what the mayor said, just infill properties as we've been doing a pretty good job in the last few years, I think, of filling those in, but there'll be other properties, whether it's in the core neighborhoods or whatever, that whether it's possibly tearing down some homes and rebuilding or whatever they might be. But I think, how do we look at those infill properties from all across town?
In my sense, a growth plan should reflect consolidated, stakeholder-driven perspectives, and at the same time also establish a legal status or basis for any and all actions.
Planning for growth in a way that's manageable, sustainable, and builds upon the inventory and the reflection we have from past plans.
I think this has been touched on, but also clearly serves as the guide to developers, builders, staff, citizens, and helps manage expectations.
That kind of, I agree with that the long-term, a good growth plan helps guide the short-term decisions. But I think we, as a planning commission knows, there's going to be adjustments almost on a daily basis, but if you have a long-term, that at least gives you the sense. Thank you.
Last one I have is to identify how land use interacts, and this has already been mentioned, interacts with streets, but also other public infrastructure.
We could probably, if there's more of the first question that we want to keep going around, we probably could switch to the second question.
If you're comfortable leaving your writing samples behind, we'll pick those up from you.
As long as we don't have to put our names on them and you don't try to identify our handwriting.
I might be able to recognize his
I already wrote Dave on mine.
The only thing I'd add is that, and it was touched on over here, is how we're going to pay for the infrastructure. I think the difficulty we have as engineers in the room is that, how do we pay for all the infrastructure? And recall some of the developments we did, the fire department kind of runs part of that because you got to have in and out and those types of things mitigate into the truth. But I think the other thing we've discovered as commissioners, we did some narrow roads and then bend out screams like crazy because snow removal, you got to think about snow removal when you get into that. And we've had to convert to more expensive ways of doing snow removal because the streets are too narrow. So if we're doing it in the growth plan, it's just anticipated how we're going to do that. And I think we all know that the governor's going to count it backwards. He thinks that some of our infrastructure is paid by the north side, which is not the way we do it. But it's just that myth of how things are paid for. And John, you kind of bring that up, is that kind of how we all work together. Different contingents want certain things, but again, how do we fund it in a reasonable fashion? I think we would be requested to do that going into the future by taxpayers.
Can I ask one question, Nicole? So obviously our extraterritorial zone, so to give you an example, like Horace and West Fargo, and to me, all that's kind of going together. And so how do we make sure that our growth plan is complementary to Horace and West Fargo? Because there's some of those arterials now that are going to be going, and I know MetroCog does part of that, but is the city of Fargo, do we try to do that? All right, and I apologize for asking a question out of order or whatever, but all right.
That's a really good question, and I think that's something that's been on staff's mind too. And that's probably going to be one of the things that the consultant's going to be tasked with as we go through the RFP process and go through the selection process, because you're exactly right that there is going to be some challenging growth areas there as those communities start merging together.
All right. Just one more follow-up. So the main thing is, so to give you an example, in Horace, we want to make sure, let's say 64th Avenue, that if our concept is it's mainly commercial, we want to make sure that continues into Horace. Is that already underway? I guess that's my main concern, because I think that's a thing we're all getting together. All right.
Yeah, no, to some degree, it's underway. Both the engineers and, multi-jurisdictionally, and planners multi-jurisdictionally talk and communicate. A lot of times that ends up showing up at MetroCog in those long-range plans. But the idea would be, as Mark said, that we have a little bit more interaction because our visions aren't quite aligned, and we want to kind of just make sure we understand, which is why we're doing that regional housing study.
Thank you.
Just one more comment. Is there, with this growth plan, we don't talk about going to the north much, or we haven't, what is our availability to grow to the north? And also, if you look down the road very far, is there growth beyond the diversion? It's just, I don't know if that's looking out. We've been talking that we're limited kind of going up to the diversion.
And this is going to be kind of an odd answer to that question. Here's maybe how I see it. When we hire a consultant to help us start going through the growth plan process, we're probably anticipating year and a half for this to be done. We're going to identify stakeholder groups. And obviously, everyone sitting at this table is going to be part of some sort of stakeholder group. And I think the consultant's going to be working pretty intimately with each and every one talking about these questions and what should we do? Because staff has the same questions based on some of the challenges up north, based on some of the challenges down south. What do we want to do and how we want to achieve it? And that's why it's important to maybe collect this data right now so we can find the best consultant out there to help us sort of sift through this.
Yeah, just one final thing. I think, John, you raised a great question, because Riley's Acres is doing fairly well. Why can't we grow north as well? I mean, that residential is doing good, and we have commercial a lot on our northern side industrial area, but when are you going to start introducing residential again into that area? And are we going to do stuff around Riley's Acres and continue to move north? And that exit, you can hop off that exit. It's easy to go to town. It's 20 minutes to downtown again, so when are we going to look north? We keep looking south, but when are we going to start looking north?
I can't remember where we were with the second. You want to start with the second question? What do you want the growth plan to achieve?
Guidance for property owners and developers regarding projected land use.
Something I would hope that the growth plan would achieve is inward growth. So what I mean by that is just to not just include undeveloped areas, but emphasize and identify redevelopment opportunities within already established areas, corridors, and utilizing existing infrastructure.
And I remember in 2007, when you did this, you projected how fast the city would grow. And what I'm curious about is your projection in the future, because all of us, Davies High School filled in really quick, and I think that was projected 20 years. I think it took 10 years for most of that to develop. And I'm just curious what the collective wisdom will be as to how fast we're going to fill in, because we get, at least the commission has gotten questions by developers that want to go 100th Avenue, want to go further south, wanted to develop in our south, projected stuff behind the diversion. And I always think that's an interesting question, because actually when we were planning the diversion, that's one of the debates that came up, is, well, you said in your growth plan that you're going to be here at this date. And I don't know how you guys do that, but it's a curiosity to me, because I think we see land values will go up, prices will go up, and a variety of things where developers are going to try to get ahead of us. But and I don't know how you do that, but it would be helpful, because I think, again, for infrastructure purposes, we're going to grow long lengthwise, and how do we project our CIP for every year going the next 10 years as well?
I was just going to say, yeah, it was part of a discussion yesterday where we talked about the word grow, and if that's just outward growth, or do people see them in the core neighborhoods as that's involving them as well? And I guess what I'd like the growth plan to figure out is, downtown's expanding, and it keeps kind of morphing a little bit, and so I guess I'd like the growth plan to find out where downtown is going to grow and where it's going to stop growing, so that the neighborhoods can have certainty, and I guess the businesses and developers will have certainty as well as that happens. I also kind of tie in the corridors, like the university corridor between campus and downtown that's started to redevelopment. Is that become a new neighborhood or a new line for growth to happen? And then maybe just part of that, in the past, there's some blanket zoning that has gone over parts of the core neighborhood that maybe match with what's there now, but a lot of it doesn't. And is that still the city's vision, that the zoning, should be relooked at in certain areas?
Well, when I look at this and say, when we talk about it's a growth plan, I mean, the key is that it's a plan. It can't be set in stone. It can't be law. It has to have a flexibility with certainty. And I don't know if that's possible, but we got to get somewhere close to that, because we have to have flexibility for the developers as things change. The world changes all the time. But we have to create some level of certainty. That's why the LDC is so important too, is that if we can get to a point where the certainty is there for a developer, for a builder, for a homeowner, we're going to solve a lot of these problems with having to constantly do some kind of amendment or change or adjustment to zoning. But I think the growth plan, from being on the commission for the last couple of years, has been okay, but once in a while we get stuck. And things have changed, like 64th is now an arterial road and it wasn't. And that's a major change. the growth plan has to be able to be adjusted to that major change for a developer and for everyone. You know, you can't, we can have it zoned residential, but now it's a major corridor all of a sudden, and there's no housing and there's still farming. We need to be able to look at that and be able to fix that without wrecking the whole system and create, that's why when John was talking about it, it'd be nice to be able to create a long-term growth plan, but with scheduled phases every 5 years or every whatever point where we have to stop and revisit it by our rule so that we don't have these problems and run it. Look at Davies. I mean, some of that area in Davies has grown so fast that it becomes residential that was planned to be commercial and vice versa. And it's just because the demand was there and the developers and the planning commission elected to, and the city commission elected to do that and let it happen. And then now we have some problems with that area where there's zoning's wrong in certain areas now because of how we've decided to grow. And I think that's a great example of using as we look at going forward, is because it just blew up faster than anybody anticipated, and we guessed a little bit wrong.
One thing that my neighbor here has been an advocate for is affordable housing. And with the growth plan, can we address, with my involvement with home builders, Fargo is upside down with the national average of home ownership versus apartment, versus rentals. And with us being around whatever, it's now 39%, 39 or 40, let's just say 40% housing, 60% rentals. Is there anything with the growth plan that would help address this? And I don't know if it's the growth plan or the growth plan actually does interact. I mean, it will interact with the development code, but we've still got to address affordable housing and whether the growth plan in the core neighborhoods or wherever, somehow we need to start incorporating that.
Good stuff, John. I think a growth plan needs to be contemporary and dynamic with checks on process and steps contemplated and actually undertaken.
I think when we're talking about what we want to achieve, I think overall, I want the growth plan to be achievable. I want the goals we have based on our values, but I also want them to be followed. So when we're talking about smart growth and being able to manage growth and infrastructure, building and land use, pulling data and information from the experts around us and in the larger world we live in, looking at kind of how the world is changing and being able to develop a growth plan that is going to be, I think Art said it, that's going to be flexible yet clear. There's a certain framework that we're going to follow with this growth plan, and that we're not going to abandon the values within the growth plan for, other shifting desires or changes.
Maybe a little different tact here, but I think if we're able to achieve a clear articulation of priorities and vision to the businesses of what this growth and citizens of what this growth plan is, and really tell the story, that it really can energize growth and citizen and business and development engagement as well.
So I think this growth plan is going to be one of the most important ones, because we obviously we're going to be going through, for the first time, we're kind of running out of land to develop. To the south, we've always had space to grow, and now we're going to have a limited space, and I believe that's going to lead to more pressure on the planning commission and the city commission, because the developers, we're going to have to be a lot more disciplined about what we do, because we don't have an unlimited space anymore. We have to maximize everything from here on out, especially growing to the south because we have a border. The other thing I want to add is, then I think we also need to start looking at a plan when we hit the diversion, then what happens to cities that have diversions beyond the diversion? What's the plan after that? And so that's maybe a long ways away, but I think that's a question to, what happens to, well, Winnipeg or any of those other cities that have a diversion, what happens to development outside of the diversion? Thank you.
My last one here is to ensure that growth happens, that, and I use the word ensure twice, ensure growth that helps ensure the city's sustainable financial future.
Yeah, I think really that sustainable growth is very key for this. Just so we have sustainable neighborhoods, we have walkable neighborhoods. We don't have situations like the Davies neighborhood where you can't walk to a grocery store because it's miles and miles away. So just being very cautious of, what we're deciding goes where, and limiting the segregation of those uses, just being flexible that way.
My other thought on this is if you build it, will they come? So we had a 20% growth in the last 10 years. Whatever you come up in planning as our growth plan, or what are we going to do? Just to your question is, will people participate and be part of that? I know the Hector has a development which one house has been sold, basically. Nobody's buying it into that. Yet you drive into other developments and there's building all over, the houses going up all over it. So it must be hitting the right button that people want to buy. But it'd be horrible if we came up with a growth plan and people didn't want to move into town. So it's the question, if you build it, will they come? And that I'm hoping that will help us achieve that.
This might sound silly, but I think a good growth plan makes all of our jobs really easy. We found, I've been on the planning commission now for 8 or 9 years, 9 years, I think. And the toughest times are when it's something different than our plan shows. That's when people come out and change is tough. And it's probably the same at the city commission. So a good growth plan, if we can anticipate as many things as possible, it makes all of our jobs easier and the citizens are generally happier.
Not sure if this is for the LDC or this, but would the growth plan help us identify different types of zoning ideas that might be out there?
I believe a growth plan should depoliticize and depersonalize our actions with regard to LDC and zoning and city core issues. So take the personalities out of it and the politics.
This echoes a lot of what we're hearing around the table, but I would really like to achieve some guidance and some intentional direction around protecting and conserving land for, to continue making this city we live in enjoyable, livable, workable, so that we're looking at keeping the people we have here, keeping the business owners we have here, inviting new growth, residential and commercial, not just for the next 10 or 20 years, but looking ahead to generations to come so that families can establish roots here, and that new families can come in and enjoy the beautiful land we live in.
This has been touched on, but it should help articulate, I'm sorry, that I got lost on my notes here just a minute. It will help create the most value to Fargo and its residents for the long-term impact on revenues and quality of life, which touches on a lot of what's been said.
Good. Anybody?
My last one is, it's a challenge to the planning department, and that would basically best practices. What are best practices? And to you all, I mean, that's nationally, locally, whatever it looks like, boy, this is really a hot idea or should be done. The term I hate sometimes when I'm in discussions with people is, well, we've never done that here. So we may never have done something, but do we need to do that? And how do we enjoy the best practices across the country? So the challenge of the department, and I think you are one of the best planning departments there is, but just best, what I would call best practices. So.
I think just for timing, the mayor can have the last word. Does that work? And
Yeah, and I think, we have a little presentation here based on timing. I think I'm going to skip a little bit. And this has been an excellent discussion, so it maybe gives us a few minutes to ask some more questions. I'm going to geek out a little bit on you here. I've been at the city of Fargo for a while, and I think the growth plan is my favorite document because it's like a shield. It helps me, work with the developer and say, this is what we've identified, but sometimes the commissioners are like, well, we need to do this. And it's like, well, the plan you approved says this. So it helps us do our jobs better, and it creates more certainty out there for when we are anticipating development, what that should look like. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and then maybe we'll have some more questions here for the next 10 minutes.
Sure, so for next steps, we plan to also coordinate with PUPEC and utility.
Can you move your
Yeah,
Right. Sorry, I don't want it to squeak at me. So our next steps will be to continue reaching out to other departments. So we'll be visiting with PUPEC, utility company, to understand if they have any other concerns as we finalize drafting the RFP. So we intend that it would be presented to the City Commission at their meeting on September 19th. So you can kind of see exactly when we compile all of these thoughts and visions that you can look at it, and then we'll start working on finding that consultant to help us with this exciting process. So you can see on the screen, September is when we would launch it, and then we would anticipate the consulting firms to put the information together by the end of October, do some selecting around the holidays, and hopefully have a finalized consultant team at the end of the year to launch at the beginning of January of 23. I don't know if there's anything else we need to do. I'll pass out a summary as well.
Yeah, and we have a project summary here that is pretty in-depth. If you have some time, please read it over and get a hold of us if you have any questions or comments or thoughts on it. We've put quite a bit of time in kind of thinking through this and where we think that the city wants us to go. But what was exciting about today's meeting is I didn't really hear anybody contradict each other. Everyone was kind of saying the same thing about what we need for a growth plan, and it's going to make our job a lot easier to be able to do consulting.
About the schedule, I know the LDC is a separate deal, but is it possible that we could start the LDC earlier, so we don't wait for the completion of this plan? Because there's a lot of stuff we can do that have nothing to do with growth that can get fixed, but I hate to have us wait 2 more years to get that done.
And that's a great question. I think, maybe a fourth to halfway through the growth plan process, I think that's when we're going to start kicking off the LDC. We'll probably start working on putting together the components of what an RFP is going to look like. And once we get this going, then maybe we'll have another brown bag for the LDC.
Can you flip to the slide, the plan component slide, that one? This is kind of what's typical in what we think in a growth plan, or so we did the same exercise with our staff, and as well as, which is what led to the project summary sheet. So that's kind of our staff interplaying with the same goals. They work with the growth plan every day, all day, and have a huge list of stress points. And then in terms of our anticipated plan components includes the vision and framework findings, the scenario planning, like the growth tiers, as well as unique to this, as opposed to the 2007, is really that opportunity for that capital facilities and policy development, which is why we'll be taking the RFP draft through the Public Works Evaluation Committee and the Utility Committee. And so definitely see, working with our staff members over here in thorough detail, as well as a lot of public engagement opportunities.
I was just going to say, I know on our agenda, we did allow time for public comment, and so just given that we have 14 minutes left of the meeting, do we want to take public comment?
It's up to you.
Since we have a few distinguished members here, and I don't know how you guys usually do this, but 2 minutes from each, if somebody wants to speak.
Sounds good.
Anybody in the public wish to make a comment on our discussion? Okay. Seeing none, good. We'll close that portion of the agenda. I'll kick it back to you, Mark. I just didn't want to miss that if we had advertised it, so.
Yeah, I could jabber on all day long. If there's more questions or comments, it'd be great.
Sure. What does the schedule look like for the LDC update?
The LDC is probably going to take quite a bit more time than the growth plan. I anticipate once that gets kicked off, it's probably going to be a 3-year process to do the complete rewrite. When it comes to the LDC, we have already done quite a bit of front work through, some studies that have been done, and MetroCog has done some parking stuff, and we kind of understand what the right-of-way lists need to be today. It's going to be, the brunt of that work's going to be the zoning districts and how those complement the proposed growth plan.
I think the challenge ahead of us on the land development code is really, so just to remind everybody where we're at, we did the diagnostic study that went through and that was right, we got caught up in the pandemic, but it was about a 15-month study to really inventory all the users of the land development code and find all the conflicts and where the issues are, including with the community, the public, stakeholder engagement, and staff, and public. And it came up with 3 scenarios, kind of a low, low recommendation of improvements, a medium, and a high. The City Commission and the Planning Commission both said we want that high level of change. And which in essence, my best description of that was a form-based code goal. And so that's a huge transition between what we have today to a form-based code. And I think there's some value checks we want to do with that to make sure that's still the investment we want to make fully. And what a lot of cities end up doing is a hybrid code, what we call the code we have today, along with like kind of hot spots, if you will. And so I think the growth plan is going to help us flush out some of those things so we can have a tighter RFP and LDC rewrite process.
So I guess my question to that, and I read the diagnostic, which really, we're talking about the growth plan, but the LDC really is a counterpart to that. But the diagnostic really identified a lot of areas where our LDC is underserving the city, underserving the developers, the property owners, the users. And if we're looking at a process that's going to take maybe 5 years until we adopt a new LDC, that's 5 years of development, which is going under what we're calling an LDC, which isn't, it's outdated and needs updating. So are there assumptions that we can make and changes we can get ahead of before then, so that we're reacting to what the needs are, so that in every planning commission meeting we have, amendments to this, and we're deviating from this, and, it's not keeping up with demand. So should we wait 5 years for this, or can we make changes now?
I think, to answer that question, yeah, I think there's quite a bit of assumptions, and you can see that in how conditional overlays down our major corridors and our new developed areas, which as I drive down those, I feel like they've turned out very nice. And it's, they've been very well received, and it's had good guidance by the commission and planning commission. And I think it's one of the quick options is going to be able to codify some of those overlays into an actual zoning district, so they don't have to go through the planning commission process. They can just come and administratively, we can approve those building permits.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to clarify. I don't think by not having an updated LDC, we're maybe losing that opportunity of 5 years of development. it's probably what you're seeing is the staff investment and the case discussions that you see related to the conditional overlays, the PUDs. And so basically anything in our commercial areas nowadays has a PUD or conditional overlay. Nothing's really by right. And so that's that predictability aspect that is probably not serving everybody well. And so, so I just want to make sure we're clear on it's not anything that's maybe delinquent in nature. It's more about the process it takes to get there is laborious.
Go ahead, Dave.
Can I ask a favor? So you have a list of the partners. It's a really good list. One of them is the neighborhood groups. That's awesome. If I could ask if you could add these, NDSU, I think that would be a good one. And then also, I know you have the EDC and the chamber, but if you could even have the top 4 employers in Fargo or whatever number you want to pick, but to have them, I think that would be good, just because, for one thing, just for them to share what their growth intentions are and things like that. So just, if you wouldn't mind adding those, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead. Back to Thomas's comment, is there a possibility that some of the things that we are relatively certain we're going to get into the LDC, like the parking studies and that, can we, by endorsement through the planning commission and then the commission, can we, I don't know if you'd call it policy or whatever, so like the parking reduction one is a big one that comes before us all the time. Could we draft, at least start drafting some of that policy to, make it easier for developers as we've, or just some of the, if we go back to the things that have caused a little bit of heartache in the last couple of years. I mean, I don't know if you like to adopt parts of a new code or at least ahead of time, but 5 years from now and it probably will be 5 years for the LDC. I mean, it is a long time to keep kind of kicking the can down the road till all of a sudden we got a whole new plan.
For parking specific, there's been a recent study done that identifies all that. And as well as we've been able to see what we've done for these parking reductions, for example, senior centers, nursing homes, they're always the conditional use permit for the alternative access plan for parking reduction. And I think a lot of that stuff we probably are not going to have to hash through because of how it's been established on the past studies. And MetroCog's got a great parking study that's reflective of that I think it would require the group to sort of sit down and say, do these numbers look right? And it would be in the code. So I don't know if there'd be that much research on some of that.
I mean, yeah, in essence, like
I think some of those things we're already putting in practice. And so
Yes.
like those study comments, the elements from the comments are coming into the work we already do with Jeremy's office and planning. So, those ratios have been established. We're not reinventing the wheel every time when we interact with the public. I think our number one issue, I'm just going to say it, is staffing and resources. I have one long-range planner, and that's Kim. And otherwise, we're working on all the day-to-day operations of planning. And so that's what's really hard. We're right now working with, 5 different consultants on 5 different projects, plus supporting engineering and other long-range plans. Take care of all of these at once, nor would we want to, because we've got to figure out our values. Because I'm just going to remind everybody, no sooner did we, that same night, we adopted our form-based code discussion and said, yes, we want to go at the brown bag and at that, the brown bag and get that affirmation between planning and city commission. We had a big debate on zoning because it wasn't meeting the growth plan and the goals that we needed. And so that night at city commission, what was showing up in front of city commission was not aligning with the values we thought we had mentioned at noon that day. And so that's where we really want to value check, because we're talking about at least $500,000 of investment in code writing and about $300,000 to $400,000 of investment in growth planning. And so that's a lot of money going into setting the values and affirming those up with the public. So that's where I want to, it can't be flippant, and it has to be on target and withstand the change of time.
One thought that occurs to me, and it's kind of been alluded to here, the core neighborhoods relative versus growth to the edges. Just to pick up on that a little further, and we also know we have a limited amount of space in which to grow into the future into the long-term future. Density is a really big issue in some cities. Density as far as like accessory dwelling units. Some cities, even as far as the Twin Cities, are zoning and changing from single-family home zoning to multiple-family home zoning in existing core neighborhoods. That topic's going to, and parking, loosening up our parking, that whole issue of density is going to be a really, really big part of our core neighborhood issues in the future. And then I suppose another aspect of growth. So growth might be happening in our core neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Just so we know that, it might be vertical. Just throwing those two words out, density and vertical growth.
I think part of the concern that we're voicing, just of the home builders had three major items that really bugged the heck out of them in the land development code is, could we address them before 5 years? Nathan's in the crowd. We're looking at basement floodproofing, low Mars, those types of things. If the diversions here, is it a different game of foot? And can we start looking at that before 26? Can we look at that in 24, 25, whatever? I think you're saying, Nicole, we're into all the study, but I think the question was, if there's some little tweaks that we can do, is that reasonable? Can we, and I don't want to screw up the plans or everything like that, but usually home builders has 3 or 4 complaints, as far as I've been around you guys for these many years. It's something that's bugging you. But would it be reasonable that if there's some slight easy fixes we could do?
I'm willing to see what the home builders and others think are the easy fixes.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any easy fixes that I have found that wouldn't require 6 months or 8 months of investment of staff time.
So on the growth plan, I like this project summary. I think there was an important item that you came up with for outcomes that we haven't talked about. I think we all know the benefit that incentives have played over the last 15 years of growth. And it mentions in here that this growth plan can help inform that discussion on what are the right incentives going forward too. And I think that's a really valuable point that you guys came up with that we did not mention. But I guess you also mentioned how it can inform the tax structure, and I guess I don't really know what that means. And so that was a question I had. You don't have to answer now, but that was one thing I didn't understand in this context.
Sure, I was just looking at the time. 'Cause we do have a hard stop at 4:25, so maybe I'll take that
That's fine,
and
yep.
process that. But no, I think we can explain that a little bit more, and it's, long story short, it goes back to that ROI and kind of that whole point of view with density and land use and investment.
Any final comments? We have a minute left.
And I'll definitely follow up, I definitely follow up with John and Mayor and, this concern about, what are we missing by not having the code up to date? I guess, Abby, I'm all ears on what we think.
And I'll just say, we appreciate all the planning staff's work on this, and I assume the other departments play into this as well, and there are a lot of them in the room, and so we appreciate everybody's comprehensive look at this.
I just wanted to say from the commission, I remember many years ago, the planning commission had 4 8-hour meetings because all the neighborhoods that were in there had torches. It was a kind of a difficult time. And we loved it because the planning commission took all that heat. And then when it got to the commission, you either said yes down or did something else. But I think over the years, what you have done for the commission is oftentimes you've made good decisions that then come to us and we're easier to, you vetted it with the neighborhood, you vetted it with the people. So by the time it gets to the commission, it's at least defined. A lot of the arguments are out there and everything done. So I don't know if you always get a pat on the back, but I think as a commission, we really appreciate that because it does decrease the amount of work we have to do. And we love it when you have the torches in your room and they're not in our room, so thank you.